What is up, guys? How is everybody doing today? I see Brock is in here early. We're going to cover a lot today. Obviously, the thumbnail I put up there is Bitcoin digital gold. And I think we can confirm from the events of the last few days that it's not quite there yet, but it's getting there. We're going to talk about that. Also, we're going to be talking about all of the macro events happening across the world. There's obviously a lot of uncertainty right now in markets between Iran and Israel and the newest that's going on there, as well as what I think is going to be materializing next, as far as the media goes, at least around those events. We're also going to be talking about the No Kings protests today. What could come from that and other negative things going on in the news right now that just leads to more uncertainty. But we're also going to be talking about why I think still a lot of positive catalysts behind crypto and some silver lining with everything going on as far as DePIN goes. We're going to break it all down, guys. See you there, Brock. What's up, man? What's up, brother? Sorry, I was a little bit late today. I was getting all my show notes together, getting ready for the show. Like I said, a lot to cover. But, guys, the markets have been getting rocked, and a lot of that is from Iran and Israel. But here's what I want to point out. Gold hits a new daily high and weekly close. Okay. What did we see with Bitcoin? Well, Bitcoin, it's holding up, but it's down. Okay. So what does that mean? Well, we've seen tensions in the Middle East. Generally, the stock market will drop. People flock to risk off assets and safe havens. We saw it with gold. We're not quite seeing that with Bitcoin. Now, I will say, I think if this had happened a few years ago, we would have seen Bitcoin take a much bigger dive. And I think we're at this really weird place that's really unique to Bitcoin right now, where we're kind of teetering between it being a risk on and a risk off asset. From one end, you have a lot of people out there that still don't understand it, that look at it as a complete risk on asset. And those are the ones that are going to sell off when these events happen. And you have to think, up until really this market cycle, there's a lot of people that played the volatility, that traded on leverage and traded it as a risk on asset. We've had a new entrant into the marketplace for Bitcoin in this market cycle, of course, with the ETFs, with the institutional buyers, to give a lot of these people that, they're still not ready to put 10, 20, 30% of their portfolio into Bitcoin, but they're willing to put 1 to 3% in the through the ETFs because they see the writing on the wall when it comes to fiat. These central banks around the world are devaluing currencies. You have the national debts of these different countries getting to the point of no return. The writing is on the wall, y'all. People are recognizing it. They're looking at gold, but they don't want to miss out on Bitcoin. And they're starting to hedge, but they're not ready to go all in yet. And I think that is where we're at with Bitcoin right now, is that it's maturing. We've got new longer term investors that are accumulating, but we're still kind of caught in the middle between the two. That's a good place to be, okay? Because I'll tell you what, once this does and people realize just how much of a risk off asset it is and how much of a safe haven it is, guys, I think that the price is going to explode, okay? Once the scarcity hits, because I think there are a lot of attributes about it that are like much better than gold, okay? Not to say it won't be bumpy along the way, because there are still threats. You have quantum computing threats that are going to come up eventually. The network needs to be upgraded to deal with those. You have Michael Saylor with MicroStrategy. It's not a non-factor. I mean, he did run a company to the ground back in like year 2000. Now, this is certainly different. Okay. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but it's a threat. And I think we need to be aware of all possible threats. Don't want to have blinders on because you need to know what the risk is involved in any of this stuff. Now, I believe in the longer term, I believe in Bitcoin, and I think it's going to go up substantially from where we're at today. And I'll talk more about that. But I think it is important to remind ourselves that it's still not, there's still risk involved, I guess is my point, in that there are still risks that things are going to drop. And another thing I want to point out here, obviously the DePIN market has been beaten down, okay? And I want to say how much lower can it go? I think it can still go lower, but when looking at the stock market, I think there is a case to be made that retail is being led to the slaughterhouse right now. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Let's pull it up, actually. And then I'm going to get to some comments, though. And here's what I'm talking about. Wall Street versus Main Street, guys. Professional investors are selling at record levels, and retail keeps buying. Okay, retail investors continue to accumulate. Look at the chart here. Institutional investors, professional investors are selling. Well, Warren Buffett's been accumulating cash. I think a lot of the smart money is quietly moving into cash. And I think that there's just a lot of warning signs in the economy right now. And retail continues to buy. And they think they're buying this dip, but is it a falling knife? I think with all the uncertainty coming up in the short term, there's certainly a case to be made that could be how this plays out. And I think we need to be aware of that. Now, on one end, we have the M2 money supply that's expanding. That's great for Bitcoin. And now that we have people that are starting to look at Bitcoin as a hedge, potentially, even maybe it's in the further out years, I think that still bodes well for Bitcoin. We're still seeing it hang on at 105,000, which is pretty remarkable given everything going on. But I think for the stock market, for large, medium, and small cap in crypto, if macro does not start to cooperate, we could see further downside. And I think we need to be aware of that. We can look at that as an opportunity, but just if you're looking at your portfolio, and you don't have enough cash to make it through and hold on to that, it's something you need to be conscious of, in my opinion. Now, the good news here, Bitcoin is never going to zero, guys. Adam Back placed a limit order for 21 million Bitcoin at 2 cents. So it's literally impossible for Bitcoin to go to zero. So whoever tells you that, tell them they're full of shit. Okay. But let's get into the news, guys. Let's talk about the big things taking place right now. And of course, Iran and Israel is at the forefront. And things do not seem to be getting any better. In fact, they seem to be escalating. And remember, tomorrow, Iran was supposed to talk to the U.S. about peace talks. And it seems that they have canceled those. And it should be no surprise to anyone with what's going on right now. This all started with Iran's nuclear facilities being attacked. There are reports that there's actually radiation, at least inside of the buildings. They're saying it's not outside of the buildings. I mean, we've heard this story before, so let's see how this plays out. Obviously not good. Now, Iran fired back, guys. The Iron Dome, I don't know. It seems that they made it through that Iron Dome. There's also reports that they shot down 2 F-35s, which to this point had not been done. But they have just sent a barrage of missiles into Israel, and there are reports that they've hit residential buildings. Either way, this thing is escalating, guys, very much so. You have also reports now that Iran's natural gas fields have been hit. And this is the largest natural gas field in the world. So, watch natural gas prices, watch oil prices. This has a huge impact, and we've been talking about this now for the better part of like a week or two about how this could impact markets, and we're seeing it in real time. There's also reports that Iran is going to attack U.S. military bases across the Middle East, which we have many of them. The U.S. is believed to at least have stepped in to help Israel defend. They have not, at least it hasn't been reported that they've been on the offense at all here. There's still mixed reports as to whether the U.S. knew that this was going to come or not. We don't know for sure. Most reports say no. But this is where things are turning, and it's the Strait of Hormuz. And you're going to see a lot about this in the coming days. This strait is very, very important. I'm going to play this video for you, actually. I think it does a pretty good job of talking through what the risks are here. And I'm going to tell you what, based on what my research, what I think could actually come of it, and whether it is truly a huge risk or not. But there's a lot that's attached to this whole deal, okay? And there's a lot of other countries that are about to get involved. But let me play this from the beginning.
This is one of the most dangerous choke points in the world, which can trigger World War III at any time. It is known as the Strait of Hormuz, one of the most crucial choke points. Controlling it means having control over the entire world, while blocking it could block the whole world. Located between the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman, this strait lies just 33 kilometers wide, with Iran to the north and Oman to the south. The main reason for its importance is that around 30% of the world's crude oil and 20% of its natural gas pass through this narrow waterway. Surprisingly, the Middle East holds 50% of the world's total oil reserves, which are exported to the world through this very route. No single country has direct control over the Strait of Hormuz. Its passage is governed by UNCLOS. Iran and Oman share the responsibility of ensuring the safety and security of all vessels passing through. And as part of this, they may collect maritime fees from the ships. If Iran were to block the Strait of Hormuz, whether due to conflict or any other reason, it could severely disrupt global energy supplies and potentially trigger a collapse of the world economy.
Okay, guys. So this is what this is where the conversation is going to start shifting to, is this strait where 20 to 30% of the oil travels through, and there's rumors right now, and there's been articles for years about this potentially happening. There are rumors right now that Iran is looking to shut this thing down and shut down oil being transported through that strait. That would be pretty catastrophic for the global economy. Obviously, oil prices would go through the roof. We've already seen oil prices go up. That always happens anytime there's unrest in the Middle East. But this could be detrimental. Now, is it likely to happen? So that's the question. And I think there's a solid take here, and then I'm going to add some color to the situation myself. But this guy, take him with a grain of salt. He's pretty biased, but I think he does have a pretty good take here. First off, he said, let's be real about the Strait of Hormuz. First of all, most of it is in control of Oman, not in Iran. Number two, it's wide enough that Iranians cannot close it. And China, this is a big part, I think. China does not want the flow of oil out of the Persian Gulf to be disrupted. Okay, why is that? Well, they buy 75% of Iranian oil. I brought this up probably a couple weeks ago about how China is the biggest buyer of Iranian oil. We have all these sanctions on Iran. China doesn't give a shit. They just buy it anyway. But that is true. Okay, if you look at Iran's exports, the majority are going to China. That's the red here. So, so why do they care? Why does Iran care about what China thinks? Well, if you guys remember, BRICS Plus, which started as Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, added they became BRICS Plus because they added a bunch of countries to their coalition. And one of those countries was in 2024, Iran on January 2024, joined that coalition. So they're kind of in cahoots. And I would expect that they'll have backing from China and Russia. And this is a big deal if this continues to escalate. And the U.S. is going to have to decide where they stand with all this. And, I would assume, based on history at least, they would step in with Israel. And this could become a much bigger conflict, okay? And that's why people are freaking out. And of course, this has a huge impact on markets, but this could escalate and get a lot worse before it gets better, in my opinion. And that is why this is super important to keep an eye on, guys. Okay, let's move on. There's going to be plenty to talk about on that, I'm sure, about that over the coming weeks. The other thing people aren't really talking about, I highly recommend following this woman. She has a really good take on the student loan fallout that's coming. If you guys remember, people were in deferment, and now these student loan issuers are collecting. And over 20% of borrowers are 90 plus days delinquent at this point. And it's going to become a much bigger deal than people are talking about. They're going to be able to take tax refunds. They're going to be able to garnish wages. If they're on Social Security, they're going to be garnishing their Social Security, and it's going to have an impact on credit scores. Now, from one end, you might say if these people aren't able to pay their student loans, they probably weren't investing in the markets, but it's going to have an impact on the economy. Guys, if all of a sudden people are having their wages garnished, they're not going to be spending money. Okay. And we're already seeing this across the board. People are tightening up their spending. Okay. And before that, people are spending on credit cards, and people are starting, that doesn't last forever. You have credit card limits. So consumer spending is going to be taking a hit. And I think that this is only going to make matters worse. That trickles through the economy. If consumers aren't spending, businesses are suffering, and employment starts to go downhill. All connected. All right. On in other uncertainty, we have the No Kings protest coming today. Today is also Trump's birthday. Now, what's interesting, I didn't realize this, is that it's also a celebration of the U.S. Army's 250th anniversary. And apparently this was in the plans for the better part of like a year before even the election last year. Now, I will say, Trump decided to alter it to include a parade. So apparently there wasn't like a parade that was going to be involved. But everyone's up in arms about this whole deal. I thought this is kind of funny. It's like, well, China, North Korea, the dictators, everyone's saying, oh, this is a dictatorship, blah, blah, blah. Well, France, UK, India, and Poland, what they all have, military parades and celebrations. And guess what? There was even one in the U.S. Everything going on with the escalations and the protests and riots at night in LA, but it's not unprecedented, is what I'm saying here, guys. We even had tanks. You're about to see this. We had tanks rolling through in DC. So I get it. I get it. People are really upset right now. But I also want to point out, like, hey, this is not like a new thing that's never happened before in the U.S. Now, this does bring me to the protests, though. And these are going to be all over the country. And it's like, yeah, you have freedom of speech. Protests are a right, okay? It's going to be happening across 2,000 locations across the country in protest of Donald Trump. That's well within people's right. But this could escalate. And I don't know what that's going to look like. But it does call into question, actually. I thought this was a really interesting clip. Now, I'm not a huge Chris Cuomo fan. I thought that some of the stuff he did during COVID was pretty ridiculous, where he was supposed to be in quarantine. He got in an argument with some bicyclist in his neighborhood, and he caught a lot of flack around that time. But this is not some random person on X. And I want to play this clip for you guys. And I'm not trying to like spread misinformation, but I do think it's worth playing this clip. Okay, so I want to share the tab here. Pull this up for you guys.
These protests are fed by dark sources with a desire for our destruction. One of the main players in organizing and funding the Los Angeles protests is a group called CHIRLA, CHIRLA, acronym, Coalition for Humane Immigration Rights. They have received millions in government grants and state grants, but now reports are showing that there may be a foreign link, specifically from China, funding and organizing these protests. The pro-Chinese far-left Party for Socialism and Liberation, they're known as the PSL. They are working with CHIRLA, helping fund the protests in Los Angeles and maybe elsewhere. Remember, all the parties in China are controlled by the CCP. So this is China. And the party is pushing to destroy capitalism and the West. This is its agenda. This is what China wants. They even have a term for the effort. It's called the smokeless war, where they have this theory of how they'll destroy the West without actually taking to the battlefield. That's what they did during the anti-Israel campus protests. The PSL worked hand in glove with anti-Zionist student groups and helped organize and fund the Columbia campus encampments. Now it gets scarier. Where does the PSL get its money? Enter Shanghai-based socialist billionaire Neville Singham. 2017, he sold his tech company for about $1 billion. Reports show the same year he started funding far-left groups like the PSL to the tune of millions. Singham is not America's friend. He has deep business ties to the CCP, but also has strong ideological ties to communism, period. People who worked for him says he's an admirer of Mao, Che Guevara, Hugo Chavez, not friends of American culture. According to the New York Times, Singham has funded and developed a deep global empire of pro-China nonprofits in the media and grassroots political space, steering millions into these groups over the years, including the PSL. And guess who was associated with the PSL and other Singham-funded groups? Elias Rodriguez. Ring a bell? This scumbag, the 30-year-old Chicago man who murdered 2 Israeli staffers in cold blood last month to make a political...
Guys, so this is kind of wild. And Rex says, I could see it. I could see it too. In fact, there have been reports for years that China has been responsible for a lot of the fentanyl that was flowing through the southern border and killing a lot of Americans. And there's a lot of reasons for them to want to cause disruption in the U.S. So very interesting stuff. There's been a lot of reports, and I didn't know whether I believed it or not, but a lot of reports from people on TikTok saying that they were being offered $200 a day to be involved in these protests. So granted, I think there's a lot of people that really hate Trump that are out there protesting, but I do also believe there's a lot that's being organized, and it would not surprise me at all if some of that funding is coming through China, and in particular this Neville Singham guy, and he's being investigated now. So that's super interesting. This guy right here, he's a billionaire out of China. So very interesting stuff there. By the way, if you are in LA, hope you're not trying to use Waymo, because they moved all of their Waymo service out of the city with everything that's expected to take place this weekend. So be safe out there, guys. And if you want to go out and protest, that's well within your right. I would just say, like, as the sun starts to go down, be careful. People are really at edge right now with all of this, and you don't want to get caught up in some crazy stuff. All right. A lot of people asking for the receipts with USAID. I thought this was interesting. You probably won't see this in too much of the mainstream media, but USAID official and 3 corporate executives plead guilty to decade-long bribery scheme involving over $550 million in contracts. As it turns out, they were taking taxpayer money. So let's see here. They pleaded guilty for their roles in a decade-long bribery scheme involving at least 14 prime contracts worth over $550 million in U.S. taxpayer money. And when asked about it, this is the quote. Watson exploited his position at USAID to line his pockets with bribes in exchange for more than $550 million in contracts. Goes on to say that IRSCI helped to put an end to their greed and criminal conduct. Now Watson and his co-conspirators will face justice. So, guys, obviously there's going to be some stuff that's found there. I think we'll see more and more of that. Now, is it going to be the $1 trillion they said it would be? Probably not. Probably not. But, for those saying that there's no corruption, obviously there is. It's the government. There's corruption freaking everywhere in the government. What else do we have? Oh, man, this is a pretty sad story. There are a couple of lawmakers who were murdered this morning. Some guy was going around acting as a police officer and killed 2 representatives. They're both Democrats. They're saying it was a targeted shooting, and there's a manhunt underway. Now, it's being politicized already, which obviously everything's politicized these days. But some people are saying, oh, it was Republicans that were murdering them. There's also video evidence of her talking about how she voted the vote that she put in was to strip criminal aliens of health care, and how maybe there were some Democrats that were upset about that and they're targeted for that reason. She seemed distressed in the video. I don't know what the reason is. Hopefully we find out, but regardless, definitely sad and very scary too, that this is where the country is at right now, where people are literally being murdered in their own homes and targeted. It's not good. I don't care what side of the aisle you're on. That's not a good thing. I saw the reports that there's an explosion in Vegas. So you guys might have seen that on your timeline. I looked into it. It sounds like it was somebody threw a firework out of a car. So not a big deal. But with everything else going on, everyone's on high alert, man. Like you don't know what to be worried about and what the deal is. Thought this is kind of interesting. And I'm going to get into some crypto news, guys. Billionaire and friend of Prince William died during a polo match. He had a heart attack. They're saying that he swallowed a bee during a polo match. Can you imagine? What a way to go. I did look it up, though. There's an article. I don't know if I have it here. I did look it up, and there's not confirmation that it was indeed a bee, but he certainly had a heart attack. I'm pretty young to have a heart attack. Can't we all just get along, be honest, truthful, and make money? I wish, man. I wish that were the case. Wish we had more than a two-party system. I think that most people, I say this a lot, I think most people agree on most things, and fortunately it's like the few, most people vote on like one or two issues. Let's be real. And that's, there's a lot of division driven in the country. I think most people align on most things, and it just sucks that we're kind of faced with this two-party system, and it's just gotten to the point where people, you can't even have discussions about it. People get really, really upset. And it's unfortunate that that's where the country is. And shit, maybe China's been playing into that, causing that division, or at least helping to cause that division. Obviously, there's plenty of blame to go around. And then another report here before I get into the crypto side of things. Big banks report data breaches. Now, this is said that JP Morgan, Bank of America, and TD Bank report breaches of customer data, including names, social security numbers, and account numbers. You see this big red, it looks like super scary. Now, Streamer said, to guard your money with vaults, but treat your data like scrap paper. That's true. But I did look into this, guys, and I looked at the actual article behind it. It sounds like there's Chase says at least 4 customers in the state are affected. There's another one down here that said that Bank of America says that there's 1 customer saving bonds. And then there's also TD Bank said a former employee improperly accessed customers' customer's personal data. So it sounds like very few customers are impacted. Now, that said, we've seen this happen before where a few customers turn into a lot more customers. So we'll have to wait and see. But it doesn't seem like it's as big of a deal as they made it out to be here. Coin Bureau. I like Coin Bureau, though. He has some pretty solid takes. He's super smart. But we'll see. But this sounds very similar to what happened with Coinbase, by the way, where they had internal employees accessing customers' records and sharing data. Same thing. We'll see more and more of this. And one of the big problems with centralized entities, obviously, is your data gets leaked. Certainly a case for decentralization. There's a lot of projects building around that in the crypto space. It's more, he says, it's more often a competition rather than unity and pride. Hell yeah, man, no doubt about it. People align with parties. I'm seeing stuff. I saw some posts last night where it's like, guys like, I'm MAGA. I don't care what Trump does. Whatever it is, I'll be on his side. It's like, man, that's kind of crazy. Like, I don't care if it's Trump. I don't care who it is. Like, if someone's like murdering babies in the street, you're gonna be like, yeah, like that's kind of scary. I think people are. It's about winning. It's not even about the underlying issues at this point. It's kind of funny. Like, I'll talk to some friends that they either say they're aligned heavily one way or the other, and I'll ask them some questions about the actual, topics, and a lot of them align with both sides more than they realize. It just depends on the topic itself. But I do firmly believe that most people are aligned. It's just the extremists are the loudest, and they're the ones that tend to be heard the most. And obviously the media loves clicks. That's where we're at, man. The media used to be a lost leader. Is to get people on their network to watch their television program. It wasn't to make money. And, it's turned into this situation where everything's so biased because they're advertisers. I don't care if you're Fox News or MSNBC, your advertisers are what's funding your network. So you have to frame things in a certain way based on your viewership and what your advertisers want. The 24-hour news cycle also has ruined things. It's way more, and I think Denzel Washington talked about this, way more advantageous to be the first to report something and retract it later than it is to be second or third in line and get your facts straight. And that's a really messed up situation, man. Like, there's a lot of misinformation out there. And I don't know what the solution is. I think you're going to see a lot more independent journalists, that are reporting the news and trying to be objective, but there's going to be bias everywhere, guys, like no matter what. So you just have to be really careful to fact check. And that's why I always, by the way, if I'm up here, so much clickbait. Yeah, there's so much clickbait. A lot of times they have like clickbait. You click on the article and it has nothing to do with it, even what they say with it. Crazy, man. Crazy stuff out there. By the way, like that's why a lot of times, especially with the news articles, I'll click on the Grok symbol, explain this post, and it'll give you links, web pages to Associated Press, to different news media, but also different sources to make sure that like they're accurate. And over time, like which accounts tend to provide supporting evidence, which ones don't. So I just unfollow the ones that after time and time again, I realize that they're not supporting any of their claims. Sometimes I'll you guys have probably seen it. I'll comment below and say like, where's your source for this? It's not good. But what is good? Well, depending on who you talk to, BlackRock owns 3% of Bitcoin. Now, is that good? I guess that's a good question. That's more centralization for Bitcoin. Is that a good thing for Bitcoin? On one end, as I opened up with, I think it brings in more people that are potentially long-term holders. Bob said this earlier. I think ETF holders see it as a risk on asset. I think you're right, mostly. I think it's shifting, though. To my point earlier, I think people see the writing on the wall with fiat. They see that, in order for these central banks and these governments to continue on, the only option is to keep printing money. We're already seeing a shift where people don't want to buy our long-term debt. The 10 and 30-year yields are rising. Even with everything going on, people should be looking at treasuries as safe havens, and it should be driving down the yields. No one wants to buy long-term debt right now because they see the national debt, right? They see what's happening. The only way out of this, and actually this is a good point to make right now, if we see, I talked about all the possible things that could cause things to move downward between Iran and Israel, Ukraine and Russia. You've got student loan debt now going to be crushing people as they start to collect. You've got protests across the country and escalations taking place there. Not to mention, we've got a huge trade cliff coming up. All of these things together, we could see a lot more downside in the markets moving forward. And what is the Fed going to do? And I think we've talked about this, but like if the Fed is facing the decision between saving the job market and inflation going back up, I believe, based on what we've seen in history at least, they're going to choose the job market all day. So if we do see a massive fall off in this recession hit, I think we see a somewhat of a V-shaped recovery, because what have we known? Well, we know that the Fed has come to save the day, right? They will step in, and that in a lot of cases means lowering rates, quantitative easing, pushing money into the markets to save the day. And well, what does that mean? That means that we would likely see a quick recovery, but that just goes to show that's where things are headed, guys. Like gold and Bitcoin. And I think to your point, Bob, yeah, a lot of people are looking at these ETFs as, hey, I want to get some exposure. They're still like, hey, it's pretty risky, but they don't want to miss out, because looking further out, the writing's on the wall with the fiat, with the currencies, with fiat across the world, there needs to be a hedge. And I don't think gold is the only answer here. And I think people want to get exposure. And I think over time, as we start to see that risk, I guess the risk on viewpoint of Bitcoin subside, and the safe haven side of things take over, which I think is a shift we'll see. People are going to, instead of having 1%, we have 2%, 3%, 4%, 5%, and onward. And you're going to see a lot less volatility in Bitcoin, because you're going to have more long-term holders. Okay. And that's where I think things are headed. And now you have, BlackRock sees it, They own 3% of total Bitcoin. That's a big deal. You also have, Trump announced that they're going to buy $2.5 billion worth of Bitcoin, and the SEC approved it. That's a big purchase. That's a lot of money coming in, and it's not just them; it's everywhere, guys. Like, we see these announcements like every day. Butter said, "Preach on, brother." Welcome to the live, man. Yeah, I sometimes I go on my rants, man, but I think most of it's pretty based, But not to say I can predict the future, but I think this is where we're headed, guys. But this is a big purchase, and we see this across the board. It's not just institutional buying. By the way, speaking of institutions, though, Amazon and Walmart, according to the Wall Street Journal, okay, Amazon and Walmart are exploring launching their own stablecoins. It's coming. It's coming. People are going to get so used to buying, purchasing with stablecoins. They're using dollars on chain, and they probably won't even know it in a lot of cases. That is where we see the next wave of money come into the space. We've talked about what the catalysts are and where things are headed. Like, in the short term, things are scary for sure. Okay. I'll talk more about DePIN in a minute, but what are the catalysts that are coming? Well, here's one. Let me pull this up. We talked about this earlier in the week. The spot Solana ETFs, all integrating staking provisions. So the SEC basically told them to update their S1 filings, and it sounds like they all did. You have Fidelity, Grayscale, VanEck, you have Bitwise, Canary 21 Shares, Franklin Templeton, all of them, guys. And I think this is going to happen this year. When? It could be within the next few weeks, potentially, if not within the next couple of months. Think about the amount of money that's going to bring in to the space. We're finally starting to see, money flowing to Ethereum through the ETFs. I think we just broke the 16-day span of inflows. We had a small outflow that broke that streak, but I think a lot of money is going to be coming into the Solana ETFs, and that's going to bring new liquidity in. Not just into Bitcoin, though. You've got a lot of people that are holding Solana. It's going to pump the price of Solana. That is going to be a mechanism for money to flow into alts. Okay. The other thing, stablecoins. And you're absolutely right, Butters. These companies doing stablecoins are going to save a ton of money in banking fees. That is, as long as they don't just try to profit on the banking fees. Yeah, the companies will save money for sure. But they could generate revenue in fees on these stable coins. That's going to be the big question. I think there should be enough competition to push those prices down. And it's big trouble for banks. So that's why they're getting on board very quickly with stablecoins. They see the writing on the wall. But stablecoins and the Solana spot ETF and other ETFs that are coming, I think, are going to prove to be massive catalysts. Not maybe in the next month, but looking, Q3, Q4, and into next year, I think they could be massive. But again, we still need the macro environment to cooperate. And while I still, we talked about this, the global M2 was on the rise. I think that bodes well. We've seen that with Bitcoin. We see that with risk on assets. But I cover the global news every day because it has such an impact on markets, and that's what we're seeing right now. So that's not to say things can't turn around. Maybe we see the Israel-Iran conflict end. I think it's going to personally get worse before it gets better, but still a lot of uncertainty there. Same with Ukraine, Russia, right? We could see a bunch of trade deals announced. I'd say that's more likely, but time is running out. We have like 3 weeks before that, the pause comes up. So that's a huge risk, amongst other things that I've covered, right? Like the student loan's a minor one, but it's still an issue. But all these things pile up. But if things change course, then we have to change our outlook on things. Then things could turn bullish very quickly. But I bring up these other catalysts because I think looking a little bit further out, months down the road, these are going to pay dividend. And we're going to see, I think, DePIN be a big winner. Now, how am I treating this right now? Well, let's talk about the silver lining because that's what I led off with. Obviously, the market cap has dropped. Trading volumes dropped significantly on the DePIN sector. So one way you get to look at that is hey, I'm getting better entry points at the DCA in. Now you might be in a position where you're like, shit, dude, I've been buying the dip for like 6 months. When is that going to change? I feel that. I do want to talk about one other silver lining here. Before I get into that, though, I think it's important to point out this is where it's more important than ever to pick projects that have good leadership, that can survive a bear market. And when you look at that, you have some insight into what funding is and what burn rates are, kind of. But I think it's really important to pick projects that participation is passive, because those are the projects, the ones where if you have a project where someone has to interact with an app every day, and it's a little bit intensive on the participant, when the market drops out, those people are going to stop participating. So it's really, really important to look at the ones that are most passive, that have the good leadership, that can survive these down periods. So you can't just use the shotgun approach. You have to be a lot more selective right now. But the other thing I want to talk about, and this is something that people aren't talking about, I think some of the short-term pain can actually be a positive when it comes to token burns. This is GeoNet's token burns. In this row here, you'll see the number of tokens that are burned. One of the things I want to point out here is that you'll notice in this period here, we had $230,000 worth of tokens burned. We had 106,000 tokens burned. This period, 10,000 more in revenue, less tokens burned. That is because the amount of tokens burned depend on the token price. So as the GOD and the GeoNet, look at this. Like, talk about the market not making sense and macro taking over. This is a great example of it. GeoNet's, in my opinion, a blue chip DePIN. It's gotten hammered over the last day. 10%, down 10% in the last day, all because of macro conditions, unless there's some news I'm missing. But as that price gets lower, that same, let's say they have $300,000 in revenue, that's going to take a lot more tokens to get to that dollar amount. So the subsequent burn is going to be very much elevated. And we're seeing it here. Again, the token price was higher at this point, and that is why you had so much of a lower burn. So short-term painful, longer term, hey, it takes more tokens out of supply for a lot of these projects that are generating revenue. That's the key. They have to be generating revenue. In other news, was lighting the street. Pretty cool stuff. I'll play some of the interview for you guys. Why not? Why not? Share the tab here. So pretty cool to see Hivemapper. See Hivemapper highlighted here. And look at that there. Said how Hivemapper became Solana's DePIN darling. Look at that. That's pretty cool. You wouldn't know from the price, would you?
Projects in crypto land. But it's true. Here we are. But what you're doing at Hivemapper, I think, is really, really cool. For those who don't know, why don't we start there? What's the mission of what you're doing with Hivemapper?
Yeah, it's to build the freshest possible map in the world, but do it with vision, right? So historically, all the maps that have been created in terms of real-time data, they've all been based on motion, right? So you think about Waze, Google Maps, all it's basically doing is following your phone and saying, oh, you were going 30 miles an hour because we're following your GPS traces, but they don't know what happened if all of a sudden you start going 5 miles an hour, 10 miles an hour, right? Because they don't have eyes, and they don't have intelligence actually in your vehicle at the edge that actually understands and sees what's going on. So we have this device that we built that can see and understand everything that's going on. So it says, okay, there's 3 lanes over here, 2 out of the 3 lanes are blocked, there's a big accident, or there's a big construction, or it's
So very cool stuff. They talk about, I think down here, some of the, I thought this was a pertinent, worth bringing up. In just the last month, we've closed 4 deals. If you look at all of 2021, I think we did 4 deals in total. So this month we've done as many as we did all of 2 years ago. They did announce again a Fortune 50, a Fortune 20 company as both customer announcements. They haven't come out with the actual customer themselves yet, but hey, man, they brought the receipts every time they've announced big partnerships. So I think we are in DePIN at the right place at the right time, in the sense that there's building taking place. I think we've been a little bit unlucky with the way things have played out in the macro sense. So we are seeing things delayed a little bit. On the bright side, I think that's going to wash out a lot of the bullshit DePINs, that had no business case, that were just selling hardware. And, they say your participant is the product. If your revenue is coming from hardware sales, that's not sustainable. In a bull market is, but I think we're going to see a lot of the BS projects washed out, and that's a good side effect from all of this. But guys, think about this. We have, it's been stated several times now, we have VCs from the traditional Web2 space that are looking to get into crypto, and DePIN's the sector they have their eyeballs on. We have the World Economic Forum that just projected that we'd see DePIN grow to $3.5 trillion by 2028. We have projects that are now generating real revenue. And when you look at like the mobility space, you've got Hivemapper signing on huge customers, Fortune 50, Fortune 20. This would have been thought to be impossible just a few years ago, to have companies like that working with crypto entities. That's crazy. You've got Rover in the space creating HD maps. That's going to be really instrumental for autonomous vehicles. You also have 375 AI collecting data on all these billboards across the country using NVIDIA chips at the edge to process data. Huge use case for hedge funds, for public service, for advertising. They're going to be generating real revenue. The list can go on and on, but I'm really bullish on the data collection side of things, because AI makes the data actionable. Whereas even a few years ago, if your data set was too big, you couldn't make that data useful. Now, not only can you make the data useful, but if you have bad data and outlier data, it's a lot easier to get rid of that bad data using AI. And I think data truly is the new oil. The other oil is compute capacity. Okay, that's powering all the AI. We have a lot of projects in the space. Your Nasanas of the world that's selling compute and tokenizing compute. You have Render, right? You have a cash network. You have what are some other ones? I already said Nosani. You have IONET. Exabits is obviously going to be massive. They have another TGE. And then you have projects, and I talked about this on a space earlier this week, where they are generating revenue before their token launch. And that's something that we did not see before. Dava Network's an example of this. 375 AI is an example of this. I'm trying to think of some other ones. I mentioned several. So this is a big turning point, I think, for DePIN. Is there going to be some pain in the short term with all the stuff going on around the world? I think there could be. I'm looking at it as a way to potentially get better positions into the projects, but I think it's really, really important to do the research. I think the days of bull runs and alt seasons where just everything exploded all at once, it's not going to happen again anytime soon. I think retail needs to be in a much better position. I think that we need the macro environment to be in a much better position for that to take place. But as I stated before in my closing thoughts here, the stablecoin bill, the Solana spot ETFs, and I think we're going to see other ETFs come that's going to help money flow into altcoins. I think those are going to prove to be major catalysts as we look a little bit further down the road. And later this year into next year, I think could be a really good time. Maybe sooner if things start to ease on a global scale and with the economy. We'll have to wait and see. But guys, that's what I got for you today. Appreciate everyone that came in and all the interaction with everyone. Love to read the comments and be able to interact with everyone. It's a good time. And appreciate all you guys for coming in here. We got a lot of like Bob's in here every day. Really appreciate it, man. And appreciate the support. Make sure to like and share. These are recorded so people can watch it later. If you haven't subscribed to my YouTube channel, make sure to go do so. As always, I appreciate you guys. Have a fantastic day. Go out, get some sunlight, get some fresh air. Enjoy your weekend. Peace.